The two books I'm going to talk about are We the Kids and Of Thee I Sing. Now, both of these books deal with concepts relevant to American history and are intended to make these concepts a little bit more accessible to children. So the first one, We the Kids, this takes the preamble of the Constitution and uses David Catrow's illustrations and foreword to make that text a little bit more understandable and relevant to children. Catrow uses a rather cartoony feel and watercolors in his illustrations, which I think are quite enjoyable. And so the illustrations themselves are one manner in which he makes the preamble to the Constitution more accessible to children. As you see here, the phrase is establish justice, and we have this image of these children on a camp out, and over here they are listing the rules. So that's what it means to establish justice. Another thing Catrow does to make this rather complex text more accessible to children is provide a paraphrase. So here he paraphrases the text itself. So for example, where it says, ensure domestic tranquility, he writes, to make sure we can all have a nice life and get along with one another. So in some ways, you could consider that paraphraseology a bit of an oversimplification, but I think that's kind of the point. One last thing Catrow does to make this accessible to children is, as he points out at the bottom with his illustration of the dog. He says, check out what the dog is doing in this story. He will help you understand what those big words mean. So let's see an example. Here we have ensure domestic tranquility, and the dog is enjoying a television show. Here we have provide the common defense, and the dog is standing guard outside. All right, on to the second book. President Obama's book, Of Thee I Sing. Now this is a letter to his daughters, illustrated by Loren. And so in the title page here we have an image, presumably of President Obama watching his daughters walking ahead of him. And then he goes on and he poses these rhetorical questions to his daughters. Have I told you lately how wonderful you are, etc. And then he starts establishing a pattern for this book. On one page, he'll ask a question, have I told you that you are creative? And he'll show this image of his two daughters meeting someone. Now this side of the page corresponds with this side of the page, where Mr. Obama then introduces famous Americans who have demonstrated some of those characteristics he sees in his daughters. This one is Georgia O'Keeffe. And then as the book continues, the crowd on this page keeps getting bigger. So they'll meet someone else who somehow relates to the story of the great American introduced on this page. And it goes on. The crowd gets bigger and bigger. And I think President Obama does a good job at introducing a nice diversity of people as far as gender and ethnicity go. So after doing all this, in the penultimate pages, we have a full spread, whereas earlier it was only a half spread. And I think this typographically represents the theme that Mr. Obama is driving at, that there is a union between the past and the present, and between those famous Americans and the youth, like President Obama's daughters. And indeed, in the end, that theme is explicitly stated. He says, have I told you that they are all a part of you? Have I told you that you are one of them, and that you are the future? And have I told you that I love you? I think both of these books do a good job at taking potentially complex things like a personage from American history or a complex text like the preamble of the Constitution, and bring it to a level with illustrations and words that a child could connect with and understand. The tone is different in the two of them, as we see both in text and image. The tone of President Obama's is more formal than Mr. Catrow's, but both of them have, I think, undoubtedly a positive perspective on America, and I think both of these books could be used effectively to present some of these concepts to grades, I would say late elementary school through middle school.